The 10 most popular legends about Hitler. Immediately after the collapse of Hitler's Germany, the Führer became the personification of the regime for Germans, a true demon. He exerted a hypnotic influence on crowds of ordinary citizens, deluded, enchanted victims. It took decades for Germans not only to reevaluate the deeds of Hitler, Goebbels, Himmler, Goering and other Nazis, but also to acknowledge their own complicity in their crimes, even if it was expressed through silence and non-resistance to evil. On the other hand, Hitler's appearance did not at all correspond to the superhuman qualities attributed to him. He seemed too caricatured. These ideas combined in numerous myths that, after the war, surrounded the image of one of the most terrifying dictators in history. Legend 1. Hitler didn't finish high school. From 1899 to 1905, the Hitler family lived in their own house in Leonding, a suburb of the Austrian city of Linz. Adolf attended elementary school, or as it was then called in Austria, public school, and was a good student. When he turned 11, he entered high school. There he was a very uneven student, earning good grades only in subjects that interested him. Apparently he was incapable of sustained, structured work and would spend entire days doing nothing. After the first year of high school, the boy repeated a year. He subsequently viewed school as an unnecessary chore, and after the death of his father, he stopped studying altogether. His mother tried to transfer 14-year-old Hitler to boarding school, but it changed nothing. In his surviving certificate, he had good grades only in drawing and physical education, and unsatisfactory in all other subjects. Later, Hitler repeatedly expressed his contempt for the traditional education system in Germany, lashing out at schools that filled children's minds with unnecessary information, not giving them the right direction for life, and saying that all universities had replaced self-education and the trenches of World War I for him. Legend 2. He managed to pass the selection round, but the next time he failed. His drawings had too few heads, as he didn't like drawing people. The second time, he failed at the selection round. Nevertheless, Hitler did not abandon his dream of becoming an artist. He painted watercolors from photographs and from life, which were sold by his friend Reinhold Hannisch for Hitler himself. Being rejected by art shops was unbearable. Having spent the inheritance he received from his mother, Hitler made ends meet with small earnings, but did not work anywhere permanently. In 1913, to avoid serving in the multinational Austro-Hungarian army, Hitler moved to Munich, and immediately after the outbreak of World War I volunteered for the German army. He considered Germany to be his true fatherland, for the victory of which he was not sorry to give his life. In November 1918, wounded, he ended up in the hospital, where he learned of the revolution in Germany and the shameful armistice that declared Germany the instigator of the war. From that moment on, he became obsessed with becoming a politician to save Germany and restore its greatness. In September 1919, Hitler addressed a meeting of the German Workers' Party and defeated a speaker calling for the separation of Bavaria from Germany and unification with Austria. The success of this speech led first to his joining the leadership of the DAP and then to a small cohort of like-minded people recognizing him as their leader. Hitler would express his artistic views as head of state, ordering the creation of a museum of the greatest works of Aryan artists in Linz, spending hours on plans for the reconstruction of the German capital, approving the burning of hostile books. That did not correspond to the ideology of National Socialism. Myth 3. His real name wasn't Hitler. The myth that Hitler wasn't the Führer's real surname originated with his father, Alois. He was born in 1837 in the village of Strones, 80 kilometers northwest of Vienna, and until he was 40, he bore the surname of his mother, Maria Anna Schicklgruber, as she had given birth to him unmarried. When Alois was 5 years old, Maria Anna married the miller, a Johann Georg Hiedler, and gave her son to her husband's wealthier brother, Johann Nepomuk Hitler. To be raised, spelling variations of the same surname were common in villages. It is impossible to determine the boy's biological father. After his brother's death, Güttler agreed to adopt Alois, but refused to acknowledge paternity, insisting that his brother was the father having allegedly confessed to this in front of mutual acquaintances. In the birth register, the entry out of wedlock was replaced with in wedlock, and a note appeared in the margin, registered as Father Georg Hitler, well known to the undersigned witnesses, being named by the child's mother, Anna Schicklgruber, acknowledged himself as the father of the child, Alois, and requested that his name be entered in this birth register, which is confirmed by the undersigned. In January 1877, Alois Schicklgruber became Alois Hitler, although 3 crosses replaced the witnesses' signatures. His children bore this surname from birth. Myth 4. He started the trend for the brush moustache. Verdict: this is partly true. In fact, this fashion emerged in Europe much earlier. At the end of the 19th century, this style of moustache was worn in Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Russia. The brush moustache was considered practical, requiring less maintenance than a full or even curled moustache, and at the same time emphasizing masculinity. It's more likely that Hitler contributed to the resurgence of this fashion in Germany in the early 1930s. Myth 5. He was actually Jewish. Verdict: this is not true. This legend is also connected with the unclear origins of Alois Schicklgruber Hitler. According to one version, Maria Anna served in the Frankenberger, or Frankenreiter, Jewish home in Graz. It was during this time that she became pregnant with Alois. This version surfaced at the Nuremberg trials. Hans Frank, a close associate of the Führer, reported that in 1930, Hitler instructed him to investigate Alois's origins. However, Frank had no evidence. In his 1971 book, historian Werner Maser attempted to trace the Führer's genealogy through documents from the Waldviertel district, to which the village of Stronis belonged. Maser managed to prove that in the 19th century, there were no Jews or people with the last name Frankenberger among the inhabitants of Graz. Maria Anna herself came from an Austrian peasant family, and the Hitler brothers also had no Jewish roots. Legend 6. He shouted "Heil Hitler" and generally yelled all the time. He was crazy, a Satanist and an occultist. Verdict: this is untrue. The image of the mad Führer is based on newsreels where Hitler shouts obscure phrases from the podium and raises his hand. At rallies he really did shout the word Heil, the official Nazi greeting, but without his last name. Moreover, Hitler is portrayed in feature films as a shaking, screaming, wild-eyed hysteric. According to eyewitness accounts, this is indeed how the Führer looked in the final months of the war, but before that, he behaved completely differently. As for insanity, by the end of the war, Hitler suffered from hypochondria, but doctors did not diagnose him with any psychiatric conditions. Rather, he was a fanatic with an insane faith in the ideology of National Socialism, in the sacred power of the blood of the Aryan race, and the need for its purification. Finally, if we speak of the occult, there is no evidence that Hitler belonged to such societies. Rather, his associates were involved. Rudolf Hess and Hans Frank were members of Rudolf von Sebottendorf's Munich-Thule-Gesellschaft. Hess and Heinrich Himmler were fascinated by astrology, developed special rituals for members of the SS order, and patronized the Ahnenerbe organization. Hitler himself did not tolerate competitors in the struggle for influence, and after 1933 such societies were banned. Hitler harshly excluded anyone who believed in anything other than National Socialism. Legend 7. He was also a vegetarian. Verdict: this isn't entirely true. Some of Hitler's contemporaries who attended the Führer's receptions recalled that he was a vegetarian. In fact, Hitler was forced to adhere to a diet for medical reasons. Guests were always served fish and meat. It is also known that the Führer introduced the tradition of Eintopf Sundays. On one Sunday every month, instead of meat dishes, housewives across Germany and even cooks in expensive restaurants prepared vegetable stews, and the money saved was donated to poor Aryans. Thus, it can't be said that Hitler was a vegetarian for ideological reasons. Rather, he was moderate in his diet. Overlof Legend 8. He was a brilliant orator. Verdict: this is true. Hitler's oratorical talent began to emerge with his entry into politics. In the DAP, Hitler was responsible for propaganda from the very beginning, speaking at several rallies every day. His oratorical skills manifested themselves precisely in this way. In private, He came across as a rather uninteresting conversationalist. Hitler had a rather ordinary voice, but he always spoke with emotion, observing the reactions of his audience. Later, he would speak very differently, changing the content and tone of his speeches depending on the audience. Calmly and reasonably with military personnel and industrialists, aggressively and assertively with the crowd, Hitler developed a unique set of oratorical postures. As one of his biographers, Joachim Fest, wrote, he inventively combines the staging of the circus and opera with the solemn ceremonial of church liturgical ritual. Hitler's oratorical talent is evidenced by his speeches to crowds of thousands, who interrupted his speeches with thunderous cries of "Heil!" His last speech was broadcast on the radio on January 30th, 1945, when the front lines were already crossing Germany. Legend 9. There were 40 assassination attempts. Verdict not entirely true. In 1981, the renowned German writer and publisher Will Berthold published the book Die zweite Attentate auf Adolf Hitler, which was reprinted more than a dozen times. In fact, judging by the Gestapo investigation files declassified after the war, such attempts were far fewer. The most famous of the assassination attempts was Operation Valkyrie on July 20th, 1944. On that day, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg and his adjutant brought a briefcase containing explosives to a meeting with Hitler. They placed it next to the Führer. The detonator was scheduled to detonate 10 minutes later. The conspirators found a pretext to leave the meeting and were unaware that the briefcase had been moved. Several officers were killed, and Hitler himself was shell-shocked, temporarily deafened, and suffered burns and shrapnel wounds. This was a conspiracy by Wehrmacht, officers who wanted to eliminate the Führer and save Germany from defeat in the war. After the Führer's death, the conspirators planned to seize power and create a provisional government that would immediately approach the Western powers with an offer of an armistice. This assassination attempt was not the only one, but the exact number is unknown. 4 more cases were reported by the instigators themselves, but there is no other confirmation of these 4 cases. Legend 10. In fact, he did not commit suicide, but faked his death and lived for a long time. Verdict untrue. Before committing suicide, Hitler ordered the destruction of his body and the body of Eva Braun, who had become his wife the day before. According to SS security chief Hans Rattenhuber and Hitler's personal adjutant, Otto Günsche, the bodies were doused with gasoline and set alight, but they did not completely burn. On May 2, 1945, Soviet troops entered Hitler's bunker. The remains found were sent for forensic examination, which revealed that among them was presumably Hitler's corpse. The jaw, which could be used to confirm Hitler's identity by comparing it with dental records, and other remains were placed in the secret vaults of the state archives, where they remain to this day. When Stalin was asked at the Potsdam conference whether Hitler's body had really been found, he, unwilling to admit that the remains had been taken to the USSR, answered in the negative, thereby giving rise to the myth that the Führer was alive. This version was surrounded by incredible speculation. He escaped, flew away on a plane, sailed away on a submarine, lived on a remote ranch in South Bsu, America with either Eva or a mulatto woman, surrounded by children, and died quietly many years after the collapse of his regime. But these are all legends. Authoritative historians believe that Hitler really did commit suicide on April 30, 1945.